Morning, everybody. Just 1 minute. The Facebook's not set up yet. Here we go. Okay, now we are live. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Rabbi Chernitsky, Director of Chabad of Newfoundland, the People's Rabbi. We are live now on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I would like to get on Twitter as well if I knew how to do that. Anyway, so we're going to be continuing the third chapter, finishing the third chapter of the Tanya. And we had spoken about last class number 10. Talk about the concept that with our mind, with our brain, we could contemplate, meditate, and transport ourselves to another world. Right? And we had actually said at the end of chapter 2, that's the concept of connecting with that tzaddik. What do we need to connect with that tzaddik? To connect to Hashem through prayer, through Torah study, and keeping the mitzvot, because the tzaddik, his head is somewhere else. His head is in the upper spiritual realms, and that helps us too to connect our head to the higher spiritual realms, to think about God, and then develops feelings of love and fear, as we're going to be speaking at length about today, because that's what chapter 3 is all about. The concept of Chabad, which is the Hebrew acronym for Chochmah Min Hadas, wisdom, knowledge, understanding. When we speak about those words actually mean, because just the English translation doesn't mean much. It's actually a process through which we could develop emotional feelings of love and fear of God, namely, and then those feelings have other offshoots. So let's get right into it. The message of chapter 3 of Tanya that we're finishing today is that we have the power. We can live a fuller life, a more meaningful life, a more informed life, a life of loving God, loving Hashem, serving Hashem. It doesn't have to be something foreign that we do by rote just because we were used to it. That's where we were raised, and that's where we're raising our kids, just to do it like a robot. It is possible to love that which we don't see. You could have fear and a feeling of closeness for something that you can't see. We can't see Hashem. The key is that we have a head, we have our mind, our intellect, and we can use the mind to have very deep experience in a regular day, on a snowy Monday in Newfoundland even. In the daily grind, we could experience something very deep, but we usually don't experience as we go through day-to-day life. So, a quick example of meditation, contemplation, is Bainus in Hebrew. That involves all the steps that the Alter Rebbe enumerates here in the chapter 3 of Tanya. We'll first understand how our brain develops feelings. The Alter Rebbe says that the brain, the mochin, gives birth to the midas, the emotional attributes. And it could be in a way of a quick shock or a more drawn-out meditation. You could shock yourself in a way that creates awareness and then feeling, or consciousness and then feeling at the same time. There's no break in between. And you see in the story of a famous American author, he says that every day he would take the train to go home, 7 p.m. He finishes work, works at a big skyscraper in Manhattan, very stressful day. And to get home, he takes the train to New Jersey, beautiful train. All the people that take the train are intellectuals or people that work in Wall Street, people that are well-to-do. It's a very pleasant ride. Everybody's quiet, relaxing. Some people are listening to music. Some people write. Some people just stare at the window. And this author, he always looks forward to this quiet time that he has after the work at the office, before he goes home. He usually takes time to write things down, takes it easy. But one day, his quiet time was ruined. It was ruined. In one of the stops, a father gets into the train with 3 rowdy children, rambunctious children. You see the kids have long hair. You could tell they haven't had a bath in many days. Their clothing is dirty. And the kids are, it's Freilach. The kids are running back and forth from one train to the other, disturbing everybody. People are staring at the kids, and they're thinking, what are these kids orphans? Like, where's the father? They don't have a father? The father's just sitting there in a corner, doesn't do anything, doesn't say anything. And this author, who's usually a person that would keep to himself, he got very, very upset. He was looking forward to a quiet ride, these few minutes that he has before he gets home, and the kids are stealing the little quiet that he has in the day. So this fellow approaches the father and starts screaming at him. He says, "They're your kids. Do something. Don't you see they're disturbing everybody?" The father raises his eyes, and the author could see their eyes that are filled with pain, filled with tears. And he says, "You're right. I just don't know what to say. We just came back for their mother's funeral. Lo aleinu, we shouldn't know such things." The father said, after 2 weeks of my wife being sick, today was the funeral. And I did everything I could to keep her going. And yes, now it all made sense in the author's mind. Nobody could take care of the kids, their hair, give them baths, change their clothing. So the author said, whoa, why didn't I give him the benefit of the doubt? He felt embarrassed of himself. Why did I judge this father? Maybe the picture is more complex than I thought. And of course it was. His anger in 1 second was transformed to empathy. He felt bad for them. He put his hand into his pocket, took out his wallet, and he gave the older kid a $50 bill. And he said, here, when you guys get out of the train, buy a game and a hot chocolate for each one of you. So what happened here? There was awareness, and then there was feeling. First, it looked like there was a careless father. As happens today, there is such a thing as careless parents, unfortunately. And then right away created a feeling of anger in the author and all the people around him. But in 1 second, that all changed to empathy. He realized it's not that the father is disconnected from his children. It's not that he doesn't care. He's a poor and miserable father who just lost his wife, Aleinu. He was left alone to take care of the family. And this created a completely different feeling, empathy. Our world, for the most part, is poor, it's superficial, but we have the power, we have a strong mind, that we can experience something very deep. In just a second, we saw how this author's feelings changed from one extreme to the other in 1 second. What changed was the awareness. The awareness changed the feeling. So let's break it down some more, this process that we go through, from our mind to our heart. Because you don't need to, God forbid, have shocking experiences like this one to experience this. You can experience in a happy way, in a calm way, in a stress-free way. We don't want to have a fire of hay. Yeah? A hay fire, the hay catches on very, very quickly. So it looks like a big fire, but then it also dies out very quickly. That's not what we want. We want to have a wood fire. It takes a little bit longer to catch on, but it also lasts the whole day. You want to do this when you're calm, it's quiet, you're settled at home, or whatever. This is what the world calls meditation. In Lashon HaKodesh, in Biblical Hebrew, we call it Isboinus. It's the way to experience a conscious experience that brings about feelings, takes it to another world. The Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, says that the path is comprised of 4 steps: Chochmah, Bina, Da'as, and feelings. So the first 3, Chochmah, Bina, Da'as, we're familiar with from last class. Chochmah, wisdom; Bina, understanding; Da'as, knowledge. The connection to Hashem is not something that happens automatic. It's not something that should be superficial. It's actually something that's deep. It's intellectual. It was thought out. It was developed. And what does the Alter Rebbe know this from? How does the Alter Rebbe know where the soul works? The Alter Rebbe didn't have an MRI to see the soul. Yeah, and this actually the one of the main methods of psychology today in Hebrew is called Efrat, the acronym for Eidua, Parshanut Regesh Teguvah, which means an event happens, then comes the interpretation, and you interpret it. Then, based on that, you have a feeling, and then last step is the reaction. So, event, interpretation, feeling, reaction. And the way that the psychologists say you could change your feelings today, let's say you have a husband and wife that are upset at each other, kids that are upset at their parents, God forbid. How can they change their feelings that they have towards each other? So that's this process we call the fret. To, when the event happens, interpret it differently, you will feel differently, and then your reaction will be different. Right? So you change our interpretation, we contemplate what happened, and then once we change that interpretation, it's going to change how we feel about it, and that changes our practical reaction. And that's the theory of the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, who wrote the Tanya. It was a novelty when he wrote it, and he had to explain where he's getting it from. So he starts off chapter 3 with a very simple explanation. He says, I don't know the soul, but I know the creator of the soul. I learned Kabbalah, and Kabbalah explains that the build, that the godly attributes, the way God chose to express himself in this world, with those 10 attributes, which we'll speak about shortly, the soul is a reflection of those godly attributes. As the verse says in, I believe it's in Job, didn't have a chance to look this up, from my flesh I behold God. And also, B'Tselem Elokim Nivras Adam, the God created man in the image of God. That's what the Torah says in Genesis, Bereshis. So if I want to know about Hashem, I need to look at man. For man is a resemblance of God, so to speak. What does it mean? God created man in his image. God has no image. God has no body. Still, Torah says, "B'Tselem Elokim Barasa Adam," says that God created man in his image. How can you even say those words? How can you compare the table to the carpenter? No way. It's not even the same league. Bein Adoich. It's incomparably so. Imagine somebody says, the table was made in the image of the carpenter. Crazy. All the more so, man is created b'Tselem Elokim. How can you say such a thing? Man is created in the image of God. What does the Torah mean? There are many, many explanations. Kabbalah explains that this means that our soul is built in the image of the 10 godly sephiros, the 10 godly attributes, right? Which again are the 10 powers God made to express himself. He didn't have to make them, didn't have to express himself in any way. That's what he chose. So we are made in that same quote-unquote image, with those same 10 attributes. In the Patach Eliyahu, which is a part of the Zohar describing the encounter between Eliyahu and Novi, Elijah the prophet, and the sages of the Zohar, Eliyahu Novi says, "Antu dapikas tikunin, you God, you created the world with 10 tools, 10 attributes through which you connect to humankind, because God is so high, the world is so low. So to speak, God created 10 spheres, which are 10 tools with which to break that division, the big distance between us and Him. And the 10 are divided into two groups. There's the moichin and there's midas. There's the intellectual attributes and the emotional attributes. The intellectual ones are 3, the emotional ones are 7. What are the 10? So the first 3 are the intellectual ones. Chochma, bina, das, wisdom, knowledge, understanding. Yeah. And then the 7 emotional ones, chesed, kindness, gevura, severity, tiferes, beauty, netzach, victory, soid, hoid, glory, and yisoid, foundation. Translating literally, okay? In the one hand, we know that God created the world with 10 utterances, and each one of those 10 utterances represents one of the 10 sefirot, one of the 10 attributes. On the other hand, we know God created the world in 7 days. And the Ramban, Nachmanides, tells us that each one of the 7 days is one different attribute. So is it 7 attributes or 10? Well, the answer is 10 attributes, but in the creation of the world, God used a different emotional attribute, and there's 7 emotional attributes, so it's not a contradiction. Out of the total 10 attributes, 3 are intellectual, 7 emotional. So to summarize, I'll take a quick drink. At the beginning, so to speak, Hashem created, Hashem spoke, He planned for the world, He made an order. There should be Chokhmah, Bina, Das, wisdom, knowledge, understanding. And He wants a world with different beings and animals and the sun and the moon, and the world that should be a kli, a vessel for the Shekhinah, for His holy presence, a dwelling place for God below. He planned it with His intellectual attributes, so to speak. At first, there is Moichin, then come the Midas. First is the intellectual attributes, then come the emotional attributes. After Hashem wanted and planned something, then He created the spiritual powers to bring it into actuality. He created chesed, kindness, love, for beings that hadn't even been created yet. Gevura, being strict, or to judge the people that wouldn't go with the program that He created. Tiferes, mercy, which intertwines both kindness and severity. There are the three intellectual attributes, and they give birth to the emotions: love, fear, feeling of closeness, etc., etc. We're not going to go into how all the 7 emotional attributes play out. What is important for now, says the Alter Rebbe, is that I don't know the soul, but I know the creator of the soul. I know the Sephira is the attributes as the Kabbalah sages describe them, and the soul is a copy of those 10 Sephiras, those 10 attributes. Just like God expressed Himself with the 3 intellectual powers that led then emotion, so too by us, so too in the soul. So if I have consciousness, if I'm not a robot just doing mitzvot by rote, as a machine without any feeling, if I want to have a real connection with Hashem, I don't want to have a shallow life. I really want to know Hashem, think about Hashem, have a conscious closeness with Hashem, and feel that emptiness inside of me, the emptiness inside my mind, with godly closeness. Then as a result, the 3 mothers, the 3 emotional attributes, have 7 children, the 7 emotional attributes. In an automatic way, after thinking, after contemplating, that leads to loving Hashem, fearing Hashem, the desire to become close to Hashem, and a fear to, God forbid, rebel against Hashem, not to do what's against God's will. So let's just read the beginning of chapter 3 together. I'm going to get my Tanya, which, by the way, this is printed in Newfoundland. So we're going to be reading from the beginning, and I'm going to read the whole chapter. The Alter Rebbe says like this: Behine kol bechinis madregas misholish elu nefesh ruach neshama klula me'eser bechinis. כגדס הספירה של יינוס, שנשתל שלו מהן הנחלק הויס לשתיים, שנשולש אימוס, שבע כפולויס. Right, so all these levels that the soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, 3 levels of the soul, each one has the 10 attributes correspond to the 10 supernal sephiros that the soul comes from, which are divided into 2 groups. Right, there's a shalosh imes, 3 mothers, usheva kfulis, and the 7 doubles, peidush chochma bina v'da'as, wisdom, knowledge, understanding, v'shivas miyabinyan, and the 7 days of creation, as we spoke of before briefly, chesed, gevura, tiferet, chulu, right, all the 7 emotional attributes. V'kach menefesh ha'adam shenichnek shtayim, also too in the soul of man. That's divided into 2. The build-up of the soul, the blueprint. You have seichel and umidos, you have intellect and emotion. Haseichel koile chochma bina v'da'as. Intellect includes wisdom, knowledge, understanding, the Chabad, v'amidas hein avos Hashem, u'pachta yividasa, yifayid yichulu, while the emotions are loving Hashem, fear of Hashem, and glorifying Hashem, etc. The Chabad, nikru imois makro lemidos, ki amidas hein tolis Chabad. And Chabad, the Chochma Min Hadas, are called the mothers and the source for the emotional attributes, because the emotional attributes are the offspring of Chabad, of the Chochma Min Hadas. So that was the beginning of chapter 3. So we saw before, like, the shock therapy method, as described in the short story of that American author, And that proves how much we're based on intellect and then emotion. When the situation, when the awareness changed, immediately the emotion changed. We saw how much we go from consciousness to feelings right away. Then the Alter Rebbe dedicates the next part of chapter 3, which we didn't read, which is a full page of the Tanya, to explain at length how this process really works. The process of how the soul processes information and then develops feelings. Right? What's special about this is then you can take the process and use it whenever it is. When you're sitting alone, you could do it for 10 minutes, 20 minutes before daily prayer. And we can train ourselves to have a live connection with God. Let's contemplate, focus on the concept, the idea of Hashgacha Prodis, individual divine providence, with our Chochma Bina Das. Okay, so let's speak about how the process works. Chochma, which we usually translate as wisdom, refers to that very first recognition of something. Then comes Bina, which we usually translate as understanding. Bina means the development of an idea. Then comes Das, could be knowledge or understanding, the way it's translated into English. Das means connecting it to my world. So we have the first recognition, Chochma, the development of that first recognition, Bina, and then connecting it to my world, how this is relevant to me, Das. So let's go through it together. I have a colleague who shares the following story. He says he was home on Shabbat, Shabbos Bereshis, right? The Shabbat after Simchas Torah, Shabbos after Simchas Torah is called Shabbos Bereshis. That's when we start reading the Torah again. The first parsha, Bereshis, Genesis. He's sitting at home. It's 10 to 2 in the afternoon after lively prayers in his shul in Rishon LeZion in Israel. They have a beautiful kiddush, beautiful farbrengen afterwards. Everybody's very inspired. Start of the Jewish year on the right foot. Suddenly there's a knock on the door as he's falling asleep on his couch. Somebody comes in and he says, Rabbi Ashkenazi, bad news. Your son was hit by a car. God forbid. And the fellow says, but don't worry. It's not serious. He's fine. It's only a broken foot. We called an ambulance and somebody took him to the hospital. So, of course, then Rabbi Ashkenazi runs to the hospital with his wife. It wasn't a situation of life and death, so they couldn't go in a car. And they walked 45 minutes to the hospital. They go to the ICU. They see their precious son. His leg is all bandaged. The doctor comes in, young guy. And the doctor says, it's not a big deal. It's a broken leg, but it's an open fracture. He's going to need surgery. Screws have to be put in and then later removed. So Rabbi Ashkenazi was very concerned about who's the surgeon going to be. And the doctor says, he wasn't thrilled. He didn't seem like an ex-doctor. Not like the doctor you would want to do surgery on your son if needed. And what happened was, by divine providence, that the son had eaten something just before, and therefore they couldn't do the surgery. They had to wait. And by the time they waited, it was 6 hours. Shabbat was over. Rabbi Ashkenazi was able to call his father, who had connections with the hospital, and he was able to make sure a senior surgeon would do the surgery. And Baruch Hashem, thank God, everything was fine. So Rabbi Ashkenazi continues telling the story. He says, during those 6 hours of waiting before the surgery, next to his son in the hospital, what was he thinking? He started to ask himself, why did this happen? Why did God make this happen? We just started a new year. I had so many plans, so many things I wanted to do. No, the next few months I'm going to have to take my son everywhere. He's not going to be able to walk. Can't even take a drink by himself. He's not going to be able to go to the bathroom by himself. Why does God do this to me? Yeah? I want to start the year with so many plans. Suddenly the light bulb goes off and he says, wait, there's an explanation. He tells himself there's a reason. He says, Shneur Ashkenazi, did you forget everything you learned? Did you forget everything you talk about? Hashgacha Pratis, individual divine providence. The verse says that God plans the steps of man. Everything happens for a reason. It's part of the plan. We need to figure out how to make the best out of it. That was the chokhmah. That's when that flash hit him, and that already put him in a happy state. That led to feeling that God is with me. Everything is fine, and it will be fine. I'm not alone. There is a purpose, so let's figure out what it is. But after a second, then the downfall came. Really? This came from Hashem? What does Hashem have to do with anything? My son ran into the street. Me, Rabbi Ashkenazi, the father, wasn't watching over him. He crossed the street without looking, broke his leg, and with the car smashed into him. Continues Rabbi Ashkenazi. This is his thoughts. Is Hashgacha Pratis so pratis? Is individual divine providence so individualized? Affects me and my son on a Shabbat afternoon, 2 o'clock in Rishon LeZion. Okay, Hashem watches over the tzaddikim, the righteous people, but what's the connection with me? That was the first thought. That's all Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. That's the chokhmah, that flash. Then came the development, the bina, developing that idea. Right? Bina is called Eim Habanim Smecha, the mother of the children, because from Bina comes the children, the emotions. Chokhmah, wisdom, is the father. He gives her one dot. Bina is the mother that develops the dot, the seed from the father, through the 9 months of the pregnancy. Chokhmah and Bina, wisdom and understanding, are like the mother and the father. And now begins the Bina process within the mind of my colleague. He thought about how much Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, there really is. How divine providence extends over to me too, in Rishon LeZion, in Shabbat afternoon, 2 o'clock. And famously, the Rambam Maimonides says in the Moreh Nebuchim, in the Guide to the Perplexed, that there's no Hashgacha Pratis, there's no divine providence by animals. Hashem doesn't care which fish eats the other. How does that affect the creation? More than that, says the Rambam, that even humankind, God does not supervise everybody. Only the people that are important to creation, but not everybody, not every event. However, we also know that the students, the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, they said that the Baal Shem Tov said the opposite, and we know it from the students of the Baal Shem Tov. Famously quoted by the Pinchas of Kuritz and Pinchas Kuritzer. He has a famous sefer, a famous book, Imrei Pinchas, quotes his teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, and he says, the Baal Shem Tov said that we need to believe that even hay on the ground, a piece of hay that fell on the ground, that was by God's divine decree. He writes that this is what I heard from the Baal Shem Tov, that there is divine providence and how the piece of hay, the grain of wheat, will lay on the ground to the right, to the left. The Baal Shem Tov says this means that there's divine providence over every single detail, even a piece of hay. Which fish will eat some other fish? Another more so by humankind. Why should God, the infinite God, care about a fish? Why should the Ein Sof care about a child running into the street? And the Chabad Rebbeim always explained that no, every detail in the world is important. Every detail affects the whole of creation. WHOLE. And Hashem decided how much hay should grow. And Hashem decides will be a good year when it rains, and then the crops will grow, and there will be a good harvest, or not, God forbid. Will there be a drought or no drought? Think about COVID. One person in China ate one sick animal, sneezed, and synagogues all over the world were closed for months. Millions of people died. Millions of people got sick. There's another story about the Baal Shem Tov that brings out this point. He was speaking to his students about how every detail in creation is divinely orchestrated. One student says, I don't understand. Who cares? Like, how does God care? Or how is he relevant to creation? But I said, which way a leaf flies in the wind. The Baal Shem Tov said, no, it is relevant. It is important to creation. Baal Shem Tov said, go out to the forest, follow the first leaf that you see falling. And he did. He goes to the forest, he sees a leaf, and he chases after it. He sees it rolling in the wind, to the right, to the left, until it finally lands on the ground. He picks up the leaf, and he sees that under the leaf was a small, tiny worm. So he understood that Hashem makes the wind blow. He understood that Hashem makes the leaf fly in the wind and blows it this way, blows it the other way, until it falls upon a tiny worm to warm it up. He understood, this student, that every leaf affects the whole creation. The Alter Rebbe, in a different work, not in the Tanya, brings two proofs for the concept of divine providence from the Torah, from Torah sources. The Medrash tells us about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that after leaving the cave, right, he had to hide from the Romans that were chasing after him. He was 13 years in the cave. So after leaving the cave, he was shocked. His teachers had been killed. He wasn't sure if he should go back out. Did the decree against him end? He didn't know. He goes out to the field and he sees a trap. Somebody had laid a trap to catch birds. Some birds fall into the trap, some birds don't. He said, whoa, how come some of them are getting saved and some of them are not? Like, what's the difference between the birds? Seemingly they should all be trapped or all be saved. And suddenly he notices that he could hear a heavenly divine voice announcing by each bird whether it says Demus or Spok. Like Demus means mercy, Spok means punishment. He sees that there's a divine voice judging, decreeing upon each bird whether it should be saved from the trap or go into the trap. And he says, wow, he understood that even a bird is relevant to the whole of creation. W-H-O-L-E. Another famous example that the Alter Rebbe quotes comes from the Talmud, the tractate of Chulin. Our Rabbi Yochanan is by the seashore, and he sees a shalach, a type of bird that usually flies high in the sky, and then focuses down on a fish, comes down very quickly, and picks it up from the depths of the ocean, of the sea. So Rabbi Yochanan sees this and he's shocked. He says, whoa, this bird comes from the sky high up so quickly, took that fish so fast. Rabbi Yochanan quoted a verse and he said, Mishpatecha tehoim Rabba, your judgments, Hashem, are even in the depths of the sea, in the great depths. Which is a proof for what the Baal Shem Tov said, that divine providence affects even animals, fish, etc. That no leaf turns for no reason. No child gets into an accident without the divine plan making it happen. Of course, should be with kindness and mercy, everything's for the good. As Ashkenazi finishes off, and he says, the whole thing passed, and the son gained a lot from the experience. He matured a lot because of the accident. He was reborn, he said. There's a very, very positive change, and they're having tremendous nachas from the son and the rest of the children. So then they understood. That was the bina, the development, contemplation of how much Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, is relevant to him or to you. And every detail, going through all the details, what the Rambam says, what the Baal Shem Tov said about divine providence, what the Chabad Rebbe said about divine providence. To develop an idea in Jewish wisdom, that's the bina aspect. And then comes the third step, which is da'as. Da'as means connection. Das is the intermediary between intellect and emotion. Das isn't about understanding better, it's about connecting better. We said the father and mother are chokhmah and bina, wisdom and knowledge, or wisdom and understanding. After they know each other, they need da'as to have children. They need connection, intellectual and emotional connection to have children. As the Torah says about Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, and Adam knew Chava, which The simple meaning is that that's when they had children. First, Adam met Chava. Then he knew her. He knew that he wanted to build the world, humankind, with her. But then they needed the third step of yada, das, connection, chibur. In the intellectual realm, after a person studies a particular idea in Jewish philosophy, Hasidic thought, then comes the step of das. If I learned about the great divine providence, now I need to ask myself, what does that mean to me? Why am I dealing with this? This is about taking the big idea that was so inspiring that you studied, you think about it, but what does it tell me about my life? Where am I now? That's the third intellectual attribute. That's what gives birth to feelings. It's impossible that a healthy person will go through this whole process of chokhmah, first recognition, recognizing, thinking in a second, the flash of intellect of the greatness of God. Then bina, developing the idea from the Talmud, the Zohar, Jewish philosophy, etc. And then da'as, connecting it to yourself. And then the person will remain the same. That's impossible. Because if you go through this process properly, it has to create a feeling. Step 4. If I understand that divine providence is so detailed, even for me, tiny, puny me, then it has to express itself in two feelings which are opposites. Love for God, who could see me, looks over me, but then also fear. If he could see me, he also sees everything, even when I give back. Sometimes when I offer back, it's not so good. My prayers, my study are not so good. That's what the Alter Rebbe says here, chapter 3 of Tanya. And these are the 4 steps representing the tefillin, the tefillin, the black boxes worn by Jewish men during the week with scriptural passages inside. The head tefillin has 4 compartments, 4 chambers. Why? So Hasidim explain that represent the 4 steps that we had before: Chochma, Bina, Das, feelings, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and feelings. Because tefillin, their whole point is to subjugate the mind and the heart, to create a connection with God. It isn't just shallow, not just done as a routine. Rather, it's shining, it's alive, it's pnimistic. That's the whole point of tefillin. You should bind them on your, as a sign on your arm, and as a reminder between the eyes that God should be in your heart, that God should be in your mind. How do you do that? With the 4 chambers, the 4 steps, right? Again, the tefillin has the 4 chambers in the head tefillin. Chachma is the first recognition. Bina is developing the idea. Then Das is connecting the ideas and how they apply to me. And the last step is from that to come to feelings of love and fear. And with that, we conclude today's Tanya class. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you could drop us a comment here. You could always send us an email, rabbinewfoundland@gmail.com. You could also check out our website. Guess what? It's rabbinewfoundland.com. Again, I'm Rabbi Chernitsky, Director of Chabad of Newfoundland. It's been a pleasure. Have a wonderful day and a blessed week.